Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neuro-spicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things cycles, symbolism, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, your queer femme, poly kitchen witch, and proud geek. Today's topic is Queer Tarot Revisited, part one of the Minor Arcana.
All
Whew.
right.
So we are two episodes into Queer Tarot revisiting itself, going back and revisiting an episode we did a very long time ago, one of our first episodes talking about Queer Tarot. And we just did two major long episodes regarding the major arcana. So now it's time to dive in the rest of the 56 cards of the minor arcana. So,
I like that. 56 cards, just like a deck of playing cards. You could make them into your minor arcana because
exactly.
it's the same format. It's,
Sort
you
of.
know, I mean, similar.
Similar. It's very close. The difference comes in the court cards where the mage or the page is not a card in your standard playing deck.
Good point. Good
But
point. That's right.
but beyond that, yes, you can actually use playing cards to read the tarot, which is very fun to do
Yep,
as a party trick once you got this down.
I've definitely experienced somebody who uses a deck of playing cards as their divination tool, and it's not quite tarot. It's their own
Hmm.
thing. It's a little different. It was handed down to them by their ancestry, but it was a very cool experience.
Hmm.
But
Very
so the
fun.
minor arcana, the little mysteries, right?
Hmm.
What does that represent? If the major arcana are big life events, what is
Hmm.
the minor arcana?
So, like I said, I tend to think of it the major if the fool's overall journey. The whole big thing is the major arcana, the major life milestones. For me, and the way I tend to read the minor arcana is the day-to-day journey. So the
Mm,
big things that happen, but you also, while the big things are happening, you have day-to-day things that are happening. So I tend to read
right.
the minor arcana as the day-to-day journey or what is happening right now in the present or recent past future, which reflects on what's happening overall in the big picture.
I mean, and it gives really good advice, especially because not every day you're going through any, major life
Mhm. Let's
upheavals.
hope not.
Thank God. Yeah, thank the gods.
I don't think I don't want to have a tarot reading done where every card is major arcana.
I mean, it has
Oh,
happened. It has happened.
it
It
has
has
happened,
happened.
but
But
it's those are not fun.
those are usually when you're going through major life changes.
Hmm.
But sometimes we still want to get into a little bit of guidance along the way,
Hmm.
and we definitely need to attend to some of the more personal matters, the more,
Hmm.
the small mysteries, the little pebbles of our life.
Exactly. And don't think that the minor arcana is somehow less important than the major arcana because that is so untrue because the
Packed full of
day-to-day
wisdom.
things are what happens and the day-to-day is where you really get the full kind of spectrum of emotion um, gets played out in the minor arcana. Whereas an emotion and life skills and intellect and all the various things we'll talk about, but all of those things, the real nitty gritty comes out in the minor.
Yes. Yep. I agree. And I'm not a professional at this, but even sometimes the minor arcana can point to like seasons of the
Hmm.
year or like times, a distance like 3 months or
Hmm.
4 years, or it can also kind of show you timelines and past, present, future. You know, it's just got it's chock full of wisdom. There's so much
Hmm.
to it still. It's no lesser than its major arcana overseers.
Hmm.
And together they bring such a broad and in-depth, wisdom to any reading that you're giving or receiving.
Hmm. So, to start at the basics, for those of you who are not sure or unfamiliar, the minor arcana itself is broken down into four suits, which correlate to the four elements and are numbered 1 through 10. So, we have again that 1 to 10 numbering system that we saw in that mirrors the major, but
Hmm.
the four suits are air, which are swords or spades, and can be other things depending on the deck's interpretation. Fire, most commonly, is wands, staffs, or clubs. Water is most commonly cups, cauldrons, or hearts. And earth is commonly pentacles, coins, shields, discs, or diamonds. And again, each of those things, depending if you've got a different deck, can have a different name. Again, I know one is bells, books, tomes, and a few other things. And there's different decks will have different names for them. But if you're talking again about the RWS-ish systems that we're talking about for most things, we're talking about tarot, not Thoth tarot, not the other types of tarot that are out there. But in this particular breakdown, they tend to correlate to elements of one type or another, and they're going to be those four primal elements.
And then I will say that again, everything's up to interpretation, and I have
Mhm.
definitely taken tarot classes from someone who sees fire being swords and air being wands. So you're going to encounter people having different approaches, even to
Mhm.
the minor arcana. There is no one true way agreed upon in
Mhm.
any of them. But traditionally, you're going to see air being associated with the swords, fire being associated with the suit of wands, and cups as water, pentacles is earth. So you have these earth, air, fire, water elements within the major overarching energies going through the numbers
Mhm.
cycle of minor arcanas.
Mhm. And then
And then, of course,
each
yeah.
element then also represents a different attribute. So air represents the
Hmm.
mind realm. So we're talking about communication, thoughts, logic, intellect, truth, all those things that kind of are stuck in our head. I tend to think of air as you get caught up in your head. This is the heavy thoughts, the intellect, the truths that we are looking at. And please tell me
Yep.
if you do them differently. Please tell me, Damona.
No, no, these are 100% how I do it. Like air is definitely of the mind. Um, and then to balance that out, water ends up being of the heart. So you got the
Hmm.
heart and the mind. So water being emotions, intuition, connections, relationships, the ebb and the flow. And then between the two with fire, it's like creativity,
Yeah, the
passion,
creative realm. Yeah, creativity, passion, drive, inspiration, energy,
action.
momentum. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like they all kind of balance. And then, of course, when you get down to earth, it's everything manifest. It's
Yeah,
everything material.
material.
It's, how you survive, how you get food, how you have money, all of these, how you build shelter or, everything that has to do with living an embodied life here on earth. So
Hmm.
we've got the mind, the heart, the passion or the drive, and then we've got the physical presence of the
Hmm.
body. And I just feel like kind of, again, they're all different aspects of the human experience.
Right. And then on top of that, there's also the court. And this is
Yes.
something where we're talking about, if you're talking about your standard playing cards, you've got your Jack, King, Queen, King, right? Here in tarot, there is the Page, Knight, Queen, King. And I'm going to put some caveats on this because, again, we talked in the last couple sessions about gendered energies, which are not really gendered, as in everyone incorporates both masculine and feminine energies. So when we're talking about the Queen, traditionally considered a feminine energy, but it's more like a creator energy. So that creation, nurturing kind of energy. And the king is that generally masculine energy, but more again, in this sense, it's more of a leader or diviner. It is someone who is outwardly versus inwardly kind of
Right.
energy archetype.
That was my favorite way that somebody explained the court cards to me. Aside from the fact that they can represent people
Hmm.
or archetypes within yourself, aspects of yourself. And yes, I can have a king represent an aspect of myself
Hmm.
100%, even though I'm AFAB. I have my moments of king energy, of knight energy. A lot of the times we assign energies to masculine and feminine. Well, the masculine is always the outward, thrusting energy, and the feminine is the receiving, inward going in energy. And so in the court cards, I love that they embody their element. The
Hmm.
lesson of their element. And for the page and the knight, or the younger two of the court cards, masculine and feminine, they are like they bring a newness to it,
Hmm.
where the queen and the king bring an experience to it.
Hmm.
But the feminine and masculine are either they're going out into the world with this element, whether it's new or experienced, or you're going inward and into empowering yourself with these elements. So like the queen is embodying, her element and is master of it, of herself.
Hmm.
And the king is the master of the realm,
Hmm.
overseeing the outside world. So I love the idea of that internal and external journey being caught up within the court cards as well.
Hmm. So with this, and like we said before, everyone reads tarot differently, slightly differently, and especially the minor arcana can is highly personal because it's again, this is centered in your personal truths. This is centered in your day to day. So everyone's going to have a different lens for how
Hmm.
they look through it. Whereas again, the major arcana are more universal truths. So big picture, little picture, really looking through everyone's lens. So that being said, how do you kind of read the minor arcana, Damona?
Well, for one, as a tarot practitioner of, multiple decades, I have developed my own personal relationship with certain cards.
Hmm.
Which is very much true even in the minor arcana. There are some that I can name right off the top of my head that are very much like this means this to me because
Hmm.
this has always been that experience for me. And then there are others that kind of shift their meaning depending on, what's being asked or, how it's coming up in the spread. But overall, I am a numerologist
Hmm.
and there are numbers on these cards.
Hmm.
So I deeply allow for the numerology of the card, the energy, so that the elemental energy of the card, those things inform my interpretation of the card, as well as often pictorially, visually, what
Hmm.
is happening on the card and what do you notice? What is that bringing up feels wise? And what's very important is when I'm reading for other people, asking people questions like, what does this symbol mean to you? Or,
Hmm.
what does this bring up for you? And kind of that informs my reading too, because I learned something new about, this little dog on the card can mean one thing to someone where it means something completely different to someone
Hmm.
else. So I do let the visual also inform me.
Hmm.
And, just again, it depends on what's being asked and where it falls in. But I like to let all of these little elements so that I know about things like oh, it's a wand. So it's going to be about something about action that you take or the passion that you have or the desire. And, what number are we dealing with? Numerologically, this could mean that. But also what's happening in this card. Look at this picture. What do you see playing out here? So I use all of those elements
Hmm.
to glean meaning.
Hmm.
What is your approach to the minor arcana?
Similar, but slightly different. I also loosely based on numerology because I've learned from you over the years the different numerological aspects. Some of them are slightly different than traditional numerology. But like I said, I
Yes.
take the numerology through the lens, like you said, of each element for what it means, and then look at also the different interpretation from different decks. And this is where, for me, it really makes a huge difference depending on the creator of the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Because a
Mm-hmm.
three traditional RWS two of diamonds looks radically different sometimes than the two of um, earth in other things or other decks. So there can be some really dramatic shifts in meaning um, depending on the deck or interpretations of
Mm-hmm.
meaning for that. But overall, I have kind of a lens that I look things through, with aces being like new beginnings, opportunity
Mm-hmm.
and potential, twos being partnership, companionship, duality and balance, threes being creativity, growth, expansion, fours, stability, structure, and pausing for a rest. Fives are change, instability, and conflict. It's like the
And
tower light. I tend to think of as fives as the tower light.
the
Um,
fives are always like strife of some kind in the minor arcana.
mhm.
There are other numbers in certain elements that are strifeful, I guess, but all fives through all four of the different
Yes.
elements, the fives are just kind of like that hinge point. But it's, in numerology, five brings change, and some
Hmm.
people just to change super easily.
Right. So sixes are about redirection and movement
Mm-hmm.
after change. Seven about reflection, spiritual connections going deeper. Eight's hard
Mm-hmm.
work, mastering your craft.
Mm-hmm.
Nine's fruition, attainment.
Mm-hmm.
And tens are completion, end of a cycle and renewal. So there's the nines, the tens are really close together, like we saw with the minor arcana, or excuse me, with the major arcana, but they're not quite the same thing. They're both completion, but they're completion at a different level
Well,
to
and so
it.
I always want to say in like, because it does go to 10, and in numerology, we talk about single digit
Hmm.
numbers 1 through 9, and that 10 is the one again, because you add the two digits together, 1 + 0 = 1. So nines are very much like often the pinnacle, the best that you're going to get out of that element, the most abundant presence of that. And then the 10 can be starting a new cycle, but it also can also sometimes be like an overindulgence of that. So it can be like an abundance in a way that the 9 is just like the completion of the cycle, and the 10 is like a whoa.
Hmm.
So it can
And
be,
yeah, and like I said, that's why when I'm reading through it, I read it that differently because depending on the element and the
it
circumstances
does.
around the other cards, it can have that
Yep.
shift of meaning where either can be a end of a cycle, some with more impact, like you said, in
Yep.
the other. And then for the court cards, I tend to think of this as I was reading tarot on Twitch a long time ago. I would say your ace through 10 are K through 12, and your court card is university.
Oh,
It's kind of
interesting.
an idea of that breakdown. So it's taking all the lessons that you learned again, but taking them to the next level up, the next higher vibration. So if you're like we talked about it with the major arcana, the 1 through the 10, and then taking that whole lesson cycle again with the 11 through the 21. Same thing with the court cards. Only now you're taking them in 4 stages instead of 10.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that are kind of overlapping and looking at things different. So the page for me is like new beginnings, opportunity, potential, and looking through rose-colored glasses because that page is that eager beaver ready to look at the world. It's the
Mm.
apprentice. And then the knight is the working the energy of that suit. It's the journeyman. You're actually doing the work, you're doing things through, you're trying to figure out what's going on. Your action, you got motion, and sometimes you got erratic shifts in perspective because you could be doing one thing and suddenly erratically shift to something else. It's constant movement and shuffle. And then for the queen, that creator energy, it's internal maturity. It's embodying the trait of that suit and radiating that energy out. And then for the king, it's external maturity. Like we said, the internal, the external, it's imposing. So instead of embodying, you are imposing the energy
Hmm.
of it onto the world. You are leading by directive rather than leading by example. So
Interesting.
that's how I kind of look at and see when I'm reading through court, through the minor ones, is looking at everything through that lens. And as we're going through the suits, you'll see not everything fits, and sometimes they fit in a weird way. When we talk about the Three of Swords. How is the Three of Swords creativity and growth? We'll get there. So anyway, that's how I look through it in a slightly different lens and different perspective of tarot.
The other thing with the court cards is that they very often can represent people in your life, or like we've talked about archetypes within ourselves, but with the pages or princesses or whatever, they can also be very childlike. So they can represent a child or
Hmm.
the youth, and then the knights or jacks or, will off princes or whatever. Again, they're going to be different titles, but the same kind of thing. They can be kind of like the teenagers or the young adults, like the one going out into the world,
Hmm.
they to learn more. They've still got so much to learn, but they're going to go out and do it versus, the innocence and the newness and the sweetness. So I can also see them as age ranges, right? So the page being the youth, the kid-like wonder, childlike wonder, even like our inner child, whereas the page or the jack, the knight, is the teenager, the young adult, and then the queen can be like a fully realized adult in their, empowerment and adultly or adulting. And then there's the king who's like the sage, the old one, that's been around for a very long time and has
Hmm.
seen some go down and is going to tell you better, because
Hmm.
they've learned better. So yeah, you can also just see them as people. You can see their ages. You can also maybe like sometimes we can predict what sign a person could be depending on what element their
Hmm.
court card falls under. And yeah, so it's really fun to play with court cards, although those
Hmm.
are, I think, some of the hardest cards, archetypes, personalities there is to get to know
Hmm.
sometimes.
Exactly.
But also sometimes you can find a court card that you're like, that's me. I am
Hmm.
definitely the Queen of Cups. That persona is like, that is me. If that comes
Hmm.
up, I'm like, oh, that's me, sort
Hmm.
of thing.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. So, okay. So that's the basics. And we've kind of talked about how we each um, look at them from slightly different perspectives. So that being said, our first suit is the suit of swords. So that again, that's ruled by heirs. It's the mind realm. So what is the first thing that you think of that pops into your head when a sword card comes up?
the one thing that I say about the sword suit in general is that swords cut two ways. Double bladed. Swords are double bladed, so they will cut for good and they will cut for bad. They can cut you and then they can cut me. They can cut for the truth and then they can slice your ego to death. So just realize that for better or worse, swords have a lot of dualities. They have, you can't let your mind run wild.
Hmm.
Um, because it's going to hurt you. Your mind can be cruel. And so, there's a lot of sharp,
Hmm.
pokey cards and messages within the realm of swords. And intellect,
Hmm.
it's all about thoughts and intellect. So it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows through the
Hmm.
swords.
Yes, it's rarely sunshine and rainbows with the swords.
Mm,
But no, I'm very, very similar in the way that for me, the first thing that pops into my head when I see a sword card is the pen is as mighty as the sword and can cut as
mm,
deeply. Because for me, the first thing that I think of as swords is communication
words.
and intellect
Yeah.
and words. And sometimes that whole idea of words can hurt. They, yeah, because sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Not true.
Mm,
Words can absolutely hurt, and they can cut very, very deeply. And depending on whether you are saying them or receiving them, you have to be acknowledged. Like I said, it's that double-edged blade. But yeah, the pen is as mighty as the sword and can cut as deeply. That's what I think
yeah.
of when I see. That's the first thought that pops in my head anytime I see a sword card pop up.
All right, so when we put the air element of the swords element to all of these cards, all of these numbers, and we start
Hmm.
breaking them down, what is the Ace of Swords?
So the Ace of Swords to me is new ideas. So aces,
Yeah.
again, going back into that thing, they are beginnings. They are new. And because it's in a mind realm, this is new thoughts, new ideas. It's not quite the same as the wands with creativity, but it's new thought, new communication, the beginning and the spark of something that's going to relate to intellect, truth, communication, something along those lines.
And then we move on to the Two of Swords, which is often like two opponents facing each other. So it can be a stalemate, it can be a truce, it could be that you're at a crossroads. But two swords facing each other, and sometimes you talked about the twos being like companions, but this is often can be opposition as well.
Hmm. Again, you have to have a companion to be in opposition to something.
Correct.
There has to be another side to that. And that's where, again,
Yep.
that kind of, it's a different kind of lens you're looking through it. For me, the three of swords.
Mm.
Now, if there is a card
Infamous.
that in the tarot deck that I loathe is the three of swords. Because I've had this one. This is the card that, if the Hierophant haunts you, the Three of Swords haunts me. And it's really not a fun card to be haunted by. Three of Swords is heartbreak. Heartbreak,
Yep.
betrayal, and grief.
It's
It,
always the card that has a heart and has three swords stuck through it. I
exactly.
mean, it's the heartbreak card. Yeah. Yep.
And when I talked about the threes earlier, like I said, I mentioned that threes being growth and change and what did I say? Growth and
Expansion,
expansion.
creation.
Yeah, and companionship and all that other kind of stuff. Or it's creativity, growth, and expansion. Heartbreak will do that to you. Heartbreak makes you grow. Betrayal, grief, all of that forces you to grow, whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
And that's where that aspect of it cuts just as deeply. It will force you to grow. It will force you to
Hmm.
expand your thoughts, expand your mind, and to see something different and to move on from it. So yeah,
And
that three of swords, she's a beaut.
just it's the cutting side, it's the other side of the sword that cuts. And then
Hmm.
when we move on to the Four of Swords, that offers sanctuary and
Hmm.
a pause and
Yes.
contemplation and a rest from all of the conflict that you're already
Hmm.
experiencing, and sometimes you have to turn your brain off. You
Hmm.
got to unplug. So,
Right. The four swords I tend to look at as a lot of times like meditation. It's that moment of really taking the thoughts and pausing them, meditating, letting the next thing come through. It's one of the
yep.
few relatively calm cards in the suit of swords.
Well, because it's always going to shore you up for what the five brings.
Yes. And the
You
five, of
can,
course, is defeat, surrender, and conflict. If you had
yep.
stalemate at the twos, now you are full in battle right now at the five.
And there will come times in life that you have to give up the fight and admit defeat and
Hmm.
retreat and like kind of gather your tools of war and just be like, okay, I'm backing off this. This nest was not one worth kicking. So,
Right. And sometimes I was wrong, and I have to
right.
surrender and accept that what I thought was right is wrong.
That's
It's not.
important. Yep. And
From
then sixes are always so often like a healing, like a
yes.
moment of healing from the fives. And in the Six of Swords, it's calmer waters, they're making progress, or you're escaping the conflict.
Hmm.
So often, I think this is the one where you're seeing the swords in the water and there's a boat. And a lot of
Hmm.
times people will say this means travel or travel over water. But it's basically going from this place of conflict and, you know, moving on from
Hmm.
there.
And this is where a lot of the sixes actually have boats in a lot of iconography because again it's that movement in here and here where I take it as less of calmer waters in the sense that it's not emotional calm, it's that mental calm, or okay,
Right.
I need to escape out of where I was. I'm in the situation that was too detrimental to my mental state. I need to escape. And that's where I think of that as that looking at it through the lens of air, looking at it through that mind realm lens. And then leading from there, we go into the seven, which is deceit, cunning, and strategy. And so often we think of sevens as spiritual numbers, but the flip side of higher spirituality is higher mischievousness, con artists, deceit. If you're looking for universal truth, there's also universal deceit. And that's kind of the flip side to it with the aces is deceit, cunning, strategy, trying to manipulate to get what you want. There's a lot of that in the seven of swords.
And then from the seven, we move to the eight, where you are kind of feeling trapped, hopeless, powerless. A lot of times in the Eight of Swords, somebody is blindfolded, and a trap of the swords around you. And a lot of times I see this as the traps of our own making,
Mm-hmm.
getting lost to our own, getting stuck in our own fears so that we can't even get started or we can't free ourselves because we're already imagining the worst case scenarios. And so in our brain, in our nervous system, they're already coming true,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that's kind of the way the Eight of Swords cuts.
Right. And then you go into the nine, which is my second least favorite card of the deck,
Right.
because nine is anxiety. Nine
Yep.
is feeling overwhelmed. You are mentally anguished. Again, iconography wise, oftentimes there's a person in a bed with nine swords over their heads, and they're just weeping, bawling their eyes out. They are so scared and anxious about what's going to happen, or they're in this state of despair because so much has happened that they're not sure where to go, and all they can do is be in this moment of just nothing making nothing making sense and just this moment of despair and grief.
And nightmares. I always think
Nightmares.
of nightmares about them being awake at
Hmm.
night with like all these thoughts keeping me awake. It's insomnia or nightmares, you know.
Hmm.
So it's not the most pleasant one. And then so again, we said swords, the lightest, airiest, of them is also sometimes the harshest, all
Mm-hmm.
of the lessons when you break them down. But into the 10, I believe this is the one where you have the backstabbing, you
Mm-hmm.
have swords in people's back or a corpse. But it can be betrayal on a large scale. It could be that you've hit rock bottom, you've experienced failure or exhaustion, and or the ending of a cycle. Again, because it's like we're at the nines and tens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things are ending, and we say endings come for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Ten of Swords is kind of like for or worse. Like you
Right.
can't keep these things from ending,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not always going to end up pleasantly.
Right. So this is the end that you don't want necessarily.
But it's also the fun, like right, you give up the battle, you give up the
Mm-hmm.
fighting. It is potential for growth into a transformation and
Yes.
better things, but sometimes you just got to give up the fight,
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have no choice but to give up the fight.
right?
And that's where a
It's
lot
the
of this
fight
is.
is over. You can't fight. You can't constantly be in fight mode.
Mm-hmm.
That's not sustainable.
Right. Sometimes you do lose and you
Yep.
take the lessons you learn to move on, but sometimes this is that moment of loss. You've lost
Yep.
the battle. But from there, we move into the court. So we've
Hmm.
gone through the main cycles in that first round. So going into the court, we now have the page. So we've lost the battle, right? On that 10, we've reached exhaustion. So now it's time to regroup and it's time to start planning. And maybe this time we think before we speak as we're going on to do something. Instead of just speaking our mind and speaking what's out there, we've learned, well, that didn't work last time. I lost that fight. Now maybe I should think about what I'm saying before I progress.
And then also tying back to the ace, the page is all about, mental inspiration, right?
Hmm.
Being inspired by, the wisdom and knowledge that you've gained through the fights. You know, you will face your demons and face your foes so much stronger because you've learned by all of these failures and conflicts and
Hmm.
struggle. It's everything is a necessary lesson.
Hmm.
And with you have the Knight of Swords, and he's ambitious. He's showing up to the fight. He's not the king that's sending the soldiers in. He is the soldier. He's
Hmm.
going in, so he's carpe dieming it.
Hmm.
He's seizing the
Exactly.
day.
He is impulsive, he is ambitious, he knows where he wants to go, and he
Yep.
is, like I said, carpe diem. That's a perfect summation of what the Knight of Swords is. And from
Yeah.
there, we go into the Queen or the Creator card. And now she's honest. She is that brutally honest. Here's what's happened. She's candid, she's independent, but she's fair.
Hmm.
She's looked at everything. She's seen the losses. She's seen the gains. She's going to have constructive criticism for you. And we all know constructive criticism is not always the thing we want to hear. But it's the reason there's the constructive before the criticism is what we're hearing is going to help us grow. And so she is going to be honest in there, but she's going to tell you like it is and tell you what you need to do, not what you want to hear.
No, no, no. She really does know better. So you better listen to her. I'm just saying.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
that's the Queen of Swords. And then you get the king,
Hmm.
the leader, the diviner, he is rational, he's logical, he's, kind of Spock of the realm.
Hmm.
And he's intelligent and he has authority and discipline over the strategy of how we may lose some battles, but how are we going to win the war?
Hmm.
That's the king. He's the one that has the perspective up on the hill who can strategize.
Hmm. All right. So
We made it through the
that's
swords.
we made it through the swords. And it's really interesting to me when we're looking at the swords and how almost harsh the first 1 through 10 and how much relief almost you get at the court. It's like if
Yeah.
there's any court cards or any sword suits cards that you want to have pulled, if you're looking for a happy reading, you're going to want the court, if anything.
Out of the
But
swords.
out of the
Yeah.
swords. If you're looking for happy reading, that's what you're hoping for. If you're looking for a real reading, you're going to get what you're going to get. But it's
I
interesting to see that perspective.
I think intellect is hard earned.
Hmm.
I think that in order to grow our wisdom, we have to, go through a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
And I think that, the swords as a suit is one of the harder ones to
Hmm.
make your way through. But it's like you've earned what you get out of it, you know.
Right.
It's hard fought, but well earned.
Hmm. And it's something that you will remember. The lessons you've learned never go away. You will never forget those lessons that you gathered from dealing with this stuff because it's part becomes part of your universal truth.
Yeah, yeah. And it is, all about growing our intellect. So,
Hmm.
sometimes we have to, face the fears and the nightmares and the worst case scenarios and somehow make our way through what our brain is telling us in order to get into what's really happening in the world and what's really happening in front of our face. So,
Hmm.
I think we're going to wrap up our episode today since we did our big introduction to the minor arcana
Hmm.
and we did start dabbling into the suit of swords or the quality of air. But if you want to hear more about minor arcana, make sure you're tuning into our next episode where we will dive into the individual meanings of all of the wands, cups, and pentacles
Hmm.
next.
Yes.
So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to the Queer Witch Project. And if you like what you heard, give us some thumbs up and some 5 stars, and leave us a comment and tell us what your experience with the intellect, the sword suit has been. How do you feel about that? 3 swords piercing the heart, or those 9 swords giving us nightmares, and the growth of intellect.
Hmm. And if there's a topic you want to know more about or an episode topic you'd like to suggest, contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle @queerwitchproject. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Bye.
Bye!